For 8 years, they treated me like I was dead. Then came the invitation, my name written like an apology, but all they really wanted was my signature. That night, in front of dozens of wealthy guests, they turned me into a traitor in 30 seconds. Their mistake was thinking I would cry and run. I brought my files, and I turned on the screen. My name is Maddie Caldwell. I am 33 years old, and I am a senior internal auditor for a mid-sized firm here in Minneapolis. People often say my profession suits me. They say I am dry. They say I'm precise. They say I have a filing cabinet where my heart should be. They are not entirely wrong. In my line of work, you learn very quickly that numbers do not have feelings. Numbers do not lie to protect your ego or smudge the truth to keep the peace. Numbers simply exist, stark and unmovable, telling a story that most people are too afraid to read. I like that about them. I find comfort in the absolute certainty of a balanced sheet. It is a comfort I have had to manufacture for myself, because the people who were supposed to provide it decided 8 years ago that I was a liability they no longer wished to carry. It has been exactly 8 years since I last had a conversation with my father that lasted more than 3 minutes. 8 years since my mother passed away, leaving a void in our house that was filled with terrifying speed by a woman named Celeste. 8 years since my father, Grant, decided that grief was too heavy a coat to wear in the biting cold of Minnesota winters. So he packed up the house, married Celeste, and moved the entire operation to Savannah, Georgia. I was 25 then, finishing my master's degree, living in a dorm room that smelled of instant coffee and anxiety. I remember standing in the driveway, watching the moving truck pull away. My father rolled down the window and said they would call when they got settled. He handed me a check for $2,000, patted my shoulder through the open window, and said, "You are a smart girl, Maddie. You will figure it out." He did not look back. He was already mentally in Savannah, sipping sweet tea on a veranda I would never set foot on. I was left there on the pavement, a legal stranger to my own bloodline. For the first 2 years, I was pathetic. I admit that now, with the cold clarity of hindsight, I was the daughter who called every Sunday at 6 o'clock in the evening just to leave a voicemail that sounded too cheerful, too desperate. I was the one who sent birthday cards with $50 checks inside for my half-brother, Logan, who was 10 years younger than me and already learning how to look at people as if they were stepping stones. I sent anniversary gifts. I sent Christmas cards with handwritten notes detailing my life updates. I got a promotion. I moved to a new apartment. I adopted a cat. I was screaming into a void, begging for an echo. I wanted them to ask me just once if I was okay. I wanted to hear my father's voice without that impatient edge, the tone of a man checking his watch while someone else is speaking. The turning point did not come with a bang. It came with a notification on my phone. It was a Tuesday, 3 years into the silence. I was sitting at my desk, eating a salad from a plastic container, scrolling through social media, and there it was, a photo album titled Logan's 21st Birthday Bash. I clicked on it before my brain could tell me to stop. It was a lavish affair. There were white tents, string lights, and a live band. I saw my father holding a glass of champagne, looking tan and distinguished in a white linen suit. I saw Celeste in a shimmering silver dress, laughing with her head thrown back, her hand resting possessively on my father's arm. I saw my aunts and uncles, people who had held me when I was a baby, smiling for the camera. Everyone was there. Every single member of the Caldwell family seemed to be present in that well-lit garden in Georgia. Except for me. The human brain is a fascinating machine when it is trying to protect itself from pain. For a solid 10 minutes, I sat there and manufactured excuses. Maybe the invitation got lost in the mail. Maybe they thought I was too busy with tax season. Maybe they tried to call and I had no signal. I cycled through every logical impossibility to avoid the jagged truth. But then I looked at the date on the photos. The party had been planned for months. There were custom napkins with Logan's initials. There were hotel blocks reserved for out-of-town guests. You do not forget a family member by accident when you are coordinating a logistics operation of that magnitude. You forget them because you want to. You forget them because their absence is more convenient than their presence. That was the moment the sadness began to calcify into something useful. I stopped crying. I wiped my face with a napkin, closed the browser tab, and opened a new spreadsheet. That night, I started what I privately call the family ledger. If they wanted to treat me like a written-off asset, I would track the depreciation. I logged every call I had made in the last 3 years. I logged the date, the time, and the duration. 0 minutes and 45 seconds. 0 minutes and 30 seconds. I logged the tracking numbers of every package I had sent. I logged the checks I had written to Logan, noting which ones were cashed, all of them, and noting the absence of any thank you notes. It became a grim hobby. When Christmas rolled around that year, I did not send a card. I simply noted the date in my ledger. December 25th. No incoming call, no outgoing call. It gave me a strange sense of control. I was no longer a victim of their neglect. I was the witness to it. I was the auditor of their moral bankruptcy. I began to live my life in a series of quiet, solitary milestones. I bought my first apartment, a sensible 1-bedroom near the river. I signed the closing papers alone. I got promoted to senior auditor. I celebrated by buying a bottle of wine and drinking 1 glass while watching the news. I spent Thanksgiving volunteering at a shelter because it was less humiliating than sitting in my apartment knowing that somewhere in Georgia, a turkey was being carved without me. The loneliness stopped hurting after year 4. It just became the weather. It was the background noise of my existence. I became very good at my job because I had nothing else to distract me. I had no family dramas, no weekend obligations, no guilt trips. I was efficient. I was reliable. I was invisible. My colleagues liked me, but they did not know me. They knew Maddie, the auditor, who always caught the discrepancy in row 42. They did not know Maddie, the daughter, who was technically an orphan despite having 2 living parents. I learned to eat dinner alone at restaurants without looking at my phone. I learned to assemble IKEA furniture by myself. I learned that if you work hard enough, you can make yourself so tired that you do not dream. But deep down, beneath the layers of professionalism and the thick skin I had grown, a small, hard stone of resentment was forming. I knew how the world worked. I knew that people like my father and Celeste lived on leverage and appearances. And I knew, with the instinct of someone who spends her life looking for cracks in financial foundations, that eventually, the bill would come due. I looked at my face in the mirror one morning, the lines around my mouth a little deeper than they used to be, and I made a promise to the reflection. I swore that if they ever came back, if they ever broke this silence, it would not be because they missed me. It would be because they needed something. And when that day came, I would not be the desperate daughter begging for a scrap of affection. I would be the auditor, and I would make sure the books were balanced. I checked my ledger one last time before saving the file. The column for reciprocity remained at 0, and I intended to keep it that way. The silence broke not with a bang, but with a vibrating phone on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I looked down at the screen and felt a physical jolt in my chest, a tachycardia spike that had nothing to do with health and everything to do with history. The caller ID read, Logan Caldwell, my half-brother, the last time I had seen him. He was a lanky teenager complaining about his PlayStation. Now, according to the timeline in my head, he was 24. I answered. I hate that I answered. I slid that green icon across the screen with a mixture of dread and a pathetic, fluttering hope that maybe, just maybe, he wanted to know how I was. He did not ask how I was. He barely paused for a breath after I said hello. He launched into a pitch. It was polished, fast, and riddled with buzzwords that sounded expensive. He was launching a lifestyle brand. He said something about imported sustainable coffee and high-end athleisure wear. He had the vision. He had the connections. He just needed the liquidity. He needed $10,000 to secure the initial inventory from a supplier in Costa Rica. I sat in my cubicle, listening to his voice. It sounded like my father's voice. It had that same confident cadence, that assumption that the world owed him a yes. A rational person would have hung up. A rational person would have asked to see a business plan, a profit and loss projection, or at the very least, a website. But I was not rational in that moment. I was a sister who had been invisible for nearly a decade. I negotiated him down to $5,000. I told myself it was an investment in his future. I told myself it was what big sisters did. I transferred the money from my savings account, money I had set aside for a new car, and sent it with a note. "Good luck, Logan. Keep me posted." He texted back a thumbs-up emoji. That was the receipt for $5,000 of my hard-earned money, a yellow circle with a thumb. 3 months passed. I heard nothing. I saw no coffee brand launch. I saw no athleisure wear. Finally, I sent a text asking how the business was going. It took him 2 days to reply. The text was brief. Supply chain issues. Vendor ghosted. Whole thing is a wash. You understand, right? It's just how business works. There was no mention of repayment, no apology, just the assumption that I, the stable and boring sister in Minneapolis, could absorb a $5,000 loss without blinking. I swallowed the anger. I categorized it in my mind as a bad debt expense, the kind you write off at the end of the fiscal year to lower your tax liability. I told myself it was a one-time fee for reestablishing contact. I was wrong. It was not a fee. It was a test, and I had passed. 6 months later, the second hit came. This time it was Celeste. She did not call. She sent a text message marked urgent in all capital letters. The message was frantic. She claimed that a pipe had burst in the master bathroom of their Savannah estate. She said there was water damage threatening the structural integrity of the floor. She said the insurance company was dragging its feet on the payout, and the contractors needed cash up front to start the emergency mitigation work. She needed $12,000. I stared at the number. $12,000. That was my emergency fund. That was 6 months of living expenses if I lost my job. That was my safety net. I hesitated. I typed out a message asking if Dad could cover it. She replied instantly. "Your father is so stressed with the business right now. I don't want to burden him. Please, Maddie, it's our home." The word home did it. They had a home. I had an apartment. They had a family estate. I had a lease. But the guilt was a precision weapon, and Celeste was a sniper. I went to the bank that afternoon. The teller asked me if I was sure about the transfer. I lied and said yes. I wired $12,000 to an account ending in 4099. For a week, I felt a sick sense of nobility. I had saved the day. I was the reliable one. I waited for a thank you call, or at least a photo of the repaired floor. Instead, on a Saturday morning while I was drinking coffee and dreading the laundry, I opened social media. My cousin, who I had not spoken to in years but still followed, had tagged Celeste in a post. I clicked. It was not a picture of a water-damaged bathroom. It was a carousel of photos from a resort. The location tag said, Cabo San Lucas. The first photo showed Celeste and my father clinking glasses of what looked like very expensive tequila against a backdrop of turquoise water. Celeste looked tan and relaxed. My father looked prosperous. There was no sign of stress. There was no sign of a housing emergency. I zoomed in on the date stamp, uploaded 2 hours ago. Live from paradise. The caption read, I felt cold. It was a specific kind of cold that starts in the stomach and spreads to the fingertips. I did the math in my head. $12,000 would cover first-class flights, a private villa, and a week of luxury dining in Cabo perfectly. I picked up my phone. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from a rage so pure it felt like clarity. I texted Celeste. I did not accuse her. I kept it professional. Glad you guys are safe. Can you send me the invoice from the contractor for the water damage repair? I need it for my records since I dipped into my tax savings. It was a lie about the tax savings, but I wanted to sound bureaucratic. The response came 4 hours later. It was not an invoice. It was a paragraph of gaslighting. Wow. Maddie, we are on a much-needed mental health break after the stress of the leak, and you are harassing me for paperwork? You are so calculating. Not everything in life is a transaction. We are family. I read the message 3 times, calculating. That was the moment the tumblers in the lock finally clicked into place. They did not see me as a daughter. They did not even see me as a person. I was a line of credit. I was an unsecured loan with zero interest and no maturity date. I was a resource to be mined when their own liquidity was low. I did not reply to Celeste. I did not scream. I did not cry. I went to my laptop and opened a new folder. I named it the portfolio. I spent the next 6 hours doing what I do best. I audited my own life. I downloaded the PDF confirmation of the wire transfer to Celeste. I took screenshots of the text messages where she claimed the house was damaged. I took screenshots of the Instagram photos from Cabo, making sure to capture the timestamps that proved they were on vacation less than a week after begging for emergency funds. I found the transaction record for the $5,000 I sent Logan. I archived his text, saying the business was a wash. I went back further. I dug up phone records from my carrier showing the years of zero incoming calls. I found the few emails I had sent them over the years, updates on my life, birthday wishes, and logged the lack of replies. I built a dossier. It was clinical. It was irrefutable. It was the kind of evidence file I would prepare if I were building a case against an employee for embezzlement. The next day at work, I sat in the break room with Evan. Evan was one of the few people I tolerated. He worked in legal compliance. He was sharp, cynical, and had a terrifying ability to smell a lie from 3 rooms away. He saw me staring at my salad, my eyes red from lack of sleep. I told him everything. I told him about Logan. I told him about the floor that wasn't broken and the vacation that $12,000 bought. I showed him the spreadsheet I had started the night before. Evan looked at the numbers. He took a bite of his sandwich, chewed slowly, and then looked me dead in the eye. "Maddie," he said, "you know what this is, right? This isn't a family dynamic. This is a Ponzi scheme. They are using your emotional capital to fund their lifestyle because they know you are desperate for a return on investment that they never intend to pay." "They're my family," I said, but the words tasted like ash. "No," Evan said. He leaned forward. "People don't stay silent for 8 years and then suddenly remember you exist because of love. They remember you because they ran out of other people to use. You are the lender of last resort." Lender of last resort. The phrase hung in the air between us. In finance, that is the institution you go to when you are failing, when no one else trusts you, when you are on the brink of collapse. I went back to my desk that afternoon and I worked in a fugue state. I looked at the numbers on my screen, but I was thinking about my bank account. $17,000. That was the total cost of my tuition in the University of Hard Knocks. It was a steep price, but it bought me a lesson I would never forget. I did not block their numbers. That would have been emotional. That would have been a reaction. Instead, I moved their contact information into a specific group on my phone so their calls would not ring, but would go straight to voicemail. I wanted a record of every attempt they made. I wanted the data. I stopped checking their social media. I stopped waiting for the mail. I started living my life not as a woman waiting for her family to come back, but as a woman who had survived a natural disaster and was now rebuilding the infrastructure. I worked extra hours. I rebuilt my savings with aggressive frugality. I ate rice and beans. I canceled subscriptions. I punished myself financially to replace the money they stole. Because in my mind, allowing them to make me poor was the ultimate defeat. I was technically alone in Minneapolis, but for the first time in 8 years, I did not feel lonely. I felt prepared. I felt like a soldier sharpening a knife in the dark. I knew they would come back. People like Grant and Celeste and Logan always burn through their resources. They always need more. And when they came back, they would find that the bank of Maddie was closed, or rather, that the bank was open. But the management had changed, and the new manager was collecting evidence for a prosecution. I just did not know how soon the next attempt would be, or how grand the stage would be when they decided to try and bleed me dry one last time. But I had my folder. I had my backups on a USB drive locked in my fireproof safe. I was ready, or so I thought. The silence that had settled over my life for the past year was not peaceful. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of deep water. I knew something was moving in the dark, but I could not see it until it arrived in my mailbox on a Thursday afternoon. It was not a text message or a frantic voicemail this time. It was an envelope made of cream-colored cardstock, so thick it felt like a slab of drywall. My name was calligraphed on the front in shimmering gold ink. Ms. Madeline Caldwell, not Maddie. Madeline. It was the name on my birth certificate, the name of a compliant daughter, not the name of the woman who bought her own groceries and paid her own rent. I opened it in my kitchen, using a steak knife to slit the seal, because I did not own a letter opener. Inside lay an invitation that reeked of desperate opulence. It was an invitation to the Grant Caldwell, a legacy of Vision Gala. My father was celebrating 30 years in real estate development. The event was to be held at the Whitaker Hotel in Savannah, a venue I knew cost at least $500 a plate just for the salad. I read the embossed text. It spoke of family values, community building, and the endurance of the American dream. It was beautiful fiction. But what caught my eye, what made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, was a small, separate card tucked behind the main invite. It was printed on slightly different paper, as if it had been added as an afterthought or a command. Private family convening, it read, the parlor room, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Prior to general reception, attendance mandatory. Mandatory. I sat down at my kitchen island. The word mandatory bounced around my skull. They had not spoken to me since I asked for an invoice for a bathroom floor that never broke. They had ignored my existence while sipping tequila in Cabo. And now, I was mandatory? The next morning, I took the invitation to work. I did not take it to my boss. I took it to Evan. Evan was already at his desk, surrounded by stacks of compliance reports. When I dropped the heavy, gold-flecked card onto his keyboard, he whistled low and long. He picked it up, feeling the weight of the paper. "This costs more than my car insurance," Evan said. "Your dad is throwing himself a party?" "He calls it a celebration of a legacy," I said, leaning against his desk. "I call it bait. Look at the small card." Evan read the mandatory meeting notice. He frowned, his eyes narrowing behind his wire-rimmed glasses. He had the same instinct I did. When someone who owes you an explanation demands your presence instead, something is wrong. "Why now?" Evan asked. "Why break the silence for a party? If they wanted to make up, they would send a letter. They would call. This is theatrical. It is a stage." "I think they want money," I said flatly. "But I don't know why. If they can afford the Whitaker Hotel, they don't need my salary." Evan spun his chair around to face his dual monitors. "Let's find out. If he is celebrating 30 years of business, there is a paper trail. Real estate is public record. Liens are public record. Desperation is public record." We spent the lunch hour doing a forensic deep dive into Caldwell Development Partners. It is amazing what you can find when you know where to look. Most people see a shiny building. Auditors look for the cracks in the foundation. Evan pulled up the county clerk's database for Chatham County, Georgia. He pulled up the Uniform Commercial Code filings. He pulled up the active civil litigation docket. The story unfolded on the screen in black and white text, stripping away the gold leaf of my father's invitation. "Here we go," Evan muttered, pointing at a line item dated 3 weeks ago. "Lawsuit from Southern Drywall and Acoustics, breach of contract, unpaid invoices totaling $42,000. "That is a lot of drywall," I said, my stomach tightening. "Keep looking," Evan said. He clicked another tab. "Here is a lien from a landscaping firm, $12,000, and another one from a window supplier. They are bleeding, Maddie." But the smoking gun was not a lawsuit. It was a financing statement from a regional bank. Evan highlighted the maturity date on a bridge loan, a short-term, high-interest loan usually used to keep a sinking ship afloat until a bigger deal closes. "Look at the date," Evan said quietly. I leaned in. The loan was for $250,000. It was secured against the family estate, the house where I grew up, the house Celeste claimed had a broken floor, and the maturity date, the day the full balance was due or the bank would begin foreclosure proceedings, was the Monday immediately following the gala. "The party is on Saturday," I whispered. "The bank takes the house on Monday." They are throwing the party to find an investor, Evan surmised, leaning back in his chair. It is a Hail Mary pass. They need to look successful to attract money. If they look like they are failing, the sharks smell blood and swim away. So they rent the ballroom, they buy the champagne, and they pray someone writes a check before Monday morning. But where do I fit in? I asked. I don't have $250,000. They know that. Evan looked at me with a mixture of pity and professional concern. You don't have $250,000, but you have credit, you have a clean financial history, and you have something else they might need. A signature. He tapped the screen. If they need to refinance that loan to buy more time, the bank might be demanding a cosigner, someone with a stable income and a low debt-to-income ratio. Someone who isn't currently being sued by a drywall company. I felt the blood drain from my face. I thought about my savings. I had spent the last 8 years clawing my way to stability. I had exactly $88,000 in a high-yield savings account, meant for a down payment on a condo in the North Loop. It was everything I had. It was my freedom fund. They want to use me as collateral. I realized. That is why the meeting is private. That is why it is before the party. They want to corner me in a room, guilt me into signing something to save the family legacy, and then parade me out into the ballroom as the prodigal daughter to show the investors that the family is united and strong. Don't go, Evan said immediately. Maddie, seriously, throw that invitation in the shredder. Do not get on that plane. I looked at the invitation on his desk. It glittered under the fluorescent office lights. If I stayed home, I would be safe. I would keep my money. I would keep my peace. But I would also keep the question mark. I would spend the rest of my life wondering if I was right, wondering if they were truly that monstrous, or if I was just a cynical woman who had lost the ability to trust. And there was something else. A colder, harder part of me wanted to see it. I wanted to see the look in their eyes when they realized I knew. I wanted to see them try to spin their web, and I wanted to be the one holding the scissors. I have to go, I said. You are insane, Evan replied. I am an auditor, I corrected him. I don't leave a file open. I close it. I spent the next 48 hours preparing for the trip as if I were going into a hostile takeover negotiation. I did not pack a party dress first. I packed my evidence. I printed the lawsuits. I printed the loan documents. I printed the text messages about the fake floor repair. I printed the bank transfer receipts from years ago. I organized them into a sleek black leather binder. I scanned everything onto an encrypted USB drive, which I attached to my keychain. I bought a dress, too. It was navy blue, structured, and severe. It was not a dress for a party. It was a dress for a courtroom. It covered me from neck to wrist. It was armor. Before I left for the airport on Saturday morning, I stood in my living room and made a set of rules for myself. I spoke them aloud to the empty apartment to make them real. Rule 1, I said to the air. Do not drink alcohol, not a sip. You need a clear head. Rule 2, do not sign anything, not a guest book, not a card, certainly not a document. Rule 3, if they start to yell, you leave. If they start to cry, you wait. Rule 4, keep your phone in your hand and the recorder app on the shortcut screen. I sat down at my laptop for one final safety measure. I composed an email to Evan. The subject line was Case File. Caldwell. In the body of the email, I attached every single document we had found, plus a summary of my theory about the bank loan and the co-signing trap. I set a delay on the email, send automatically in 72 hours. If I came back on Monday and canceled it, fine. But if I got stuck there, if they guilted me into staying, or if something happened where I lost control of the narrative, this email would go to Evan, and he would know exactly what to do. I clicked Schedule Send. I grabbed my suitcase and the black binder. The ride to the airport was blurred by rain. As I watched the gray skyline of Minneapolis recede, I felt a strange sense of detachment. I was not going home. I was going to a crime scene. I just hoped I was the detective and not the body. When I landed in Savannah, the heat hit me like a physical blow. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of marsh mud. It smelled like my childhood. It smelled like memories I had tried to scrub away. I took a cab to the Whitaker Hotel. The lobby was dripping with crystal chandeliers and oversized floral arrangements. A sign on an easel in the center announced the Grant Caldwell Gala, Ballroom B. I checked into my room, which was on a different floor than the block reserved for the family. I paid for it with my own card. I did not want to owe them a bottle of water. At 4:45 in the afternoon, I stood in front of the mirror. The navy dress fit perfectly. My hair was pulled back in a tight bun. I looked severe. I looked like I was there to audit the IRS. I picked up the black binder. I checked my phone. Fully charged. Voice recorder ready. I walked down the hallway toward the parlor room. My heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Thump, thump. I reached the double mahogany doors. I could hear voices inside. I heard my father's laugh. A booming, performative sound that used to make me feel safe and now just made me feel tired. I heard the clinking of glass. I put my hand on the brass handle. This was it. The trap was set. The players were in position. I took a breath, pushed the door open, and stepped into the lion's den, holding the evidence of their starvation in my hands. The parlor room was not merely a room. It was a sensory assault designed to intimidate. As I stepped across the threshold, the air conditioning hit me, carrying the scent of expensive lilies and old money. The space was cavernous, draped in heavy velvet curtains the color of burgundy wine, with a crystal chandelier overhead that looked heavy enough to crush a small car. I felt instantly underdressed. My navy dress, which had felt like armor in the hotel mirror, now felt utilitarian and cheap against the backdrop of silk, taffeta, and custom-tailored Italian wool. I clutched my black leather binder to my chest, not like a shield, but like a weapon. I stood near the entrance for a moment, just watching them. They were arranged in the center of the room like a tableau in a museum exhibit titled The Successful American Family. My father, Grant Caldwell, was holding court near a bar cart stocked with crystal decanters. He looked impeccable. At 62, he had mastered the art of aging like a fine scotch. His hair was a distinguished silver, swept back perfectly. His tuxedo fit him as if he had been born in it. He was laughing at something a man in a gray suit was saying, his head thrown back, his hand resting casually in his pocket. It was a laugh I recognized. It was his closer laugh, the one he used right before he got someone to sign a contract. Celeste stood to his left. She was wearing a gown that probably cost more than my car, a shimmering, floor-length thing in emerald green that clung to her in all the right places. She was holding a champagne flute by the stem, her fingers manicured to lethal points. And then there was Logan. My half-brother looked bored. He was leaning against a high-top table, scrolling on his phone, looking uncomfortable in his formal wear. He looked like a child playing dress-up, despite being a grown man who had burned through $5,000 of my money on a non-existent coffee business. Grant saw me first. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The casual, businesslike demeanor vanished, replaced by a look of overwhelmed emotion that would have won him an award in Hollywood. He set his drink down with a sharp clink and opened his arms wide. "Madeline," he boomed. His voice filled the room, silencing the small group of early VIP guests gathered around him. "There she is. My God, look at you." He crossed the room in 3 long strides and enveloped me in a hug. It smelled of sandalwood and premium bourbon. His arms were tight, too tight. It was not an embrace of affection. It was a restraint. He was pinning my arms to my side so I could not pull away. "I am so glad you came," he whispered into my ear. "Don't make a scene. The mayor is watching." He pulled back, keeping his hands on my shoulders, presenting me to the room like a trophy he had just won at an auction. "Everyone, this is my daughter, Madeline," he announced to the room. "She flew in all the way from Minneapolis to be here for the big night. Works in finance. Brilliant girl, just brilliant." The guests murmured polite appreciations. I forced a smile that felt like it was cracking the enamel on my teeth. I did not speak. I just nodded. Celeste glided over then. Her smile was tight, stretching the skin around her eyes in a way that looked painful. She kissed the air next to my cheek, ensuring no lipstick transferred to my face, or perhaps ensuring she did not actually have to touch me. "Maddie," she purred, "you look sensible." Her eyes dropped instantly to my handbag. It was a plain, functional leather tote I used for work. No logo, no gold hardware, no designer monogram. I saw the calculation happen in her eyes in real time. She was appraising my net worth based on my accessories. She was trying to figure out if I was solvent enough to be useful, or if I was just another mouth to feed. "Hello, Celeste," I said. My voice was steady. "The house looks different. I expected to see the water damage you mentioned." Her smile did not falter, but her eyes hardened into flint. "Oh, honey, we can't talk about plumbing at a gala. Don't be dreary." Logan finally looked up from his phone. He wandered over, swirling the ice in his whiskey glass. He looked me up and down, not with brotherly affection, but with a strange, hungry curiosity. "Hey, sis," he said. He didn't hug me. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "So, finance in Minneapolis? That sounds stable. You getting into crypto at all? Or are you sticking to traditional markets? I have been looking at some high-yield verified tokens that are about to pop." I stared at him. I had not seen him in years. I was his sister, and his opening line was a probe into my investment strategy. "I keep my money in low-risk index funds." "Logan," I said coldly. "Boring, predictable, safe." He scoffed, taking a sip of his drink. "Safe is for losers. You have to leverage if you want to fly." "Or crash," I muttered, but he had already turned away to look at a waitress passing with a tray of crab cakes. Before I could retreat to a corner, a chime sounded. The heavy doors to the main ballroom swung open. The noise from the hundreds of guests outside spilled in, a roar of conversation and jazz music. "Showtime," Grant said. He adjusted his cufflinks. He looked at me, his eyes devoid of the warmth he had faked 30 seconds ago. "Stick close to me. We are going up to the podium first." "The podium?" I asked, digging my heels into the carpet. "I am not giving a speech." "You don't have to speak," Grant said, gripping my elbow with bruising force. "You just have to stand there and look like you love us. It is good for the brand." He didn't wait for my consent. He steered me out of the parlor room and into the blinding lights of the ballroom. The transition was jarring. One minute I was in a quiet, tense room. The next, I was walking down a center aisle flanked by round tables covered in white linen. There must have been 300 people there. I saw local politicians. I saw bankers. I saw the people who own the construction companies and the supply firms. I saw the people my father owed money to. He marched me right up the stairs to the stage. The spotlight hit us, blinding and hot. I squinted against the glare. The applause was polite at first, then grew louder as Grant raised his hands. He stepped to the microphone. "Thank you. Thank you all," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. 30 years. It is a long time to build a dream, but a man does not build a legacy alone. He builds it for his family. He swept his arm toward Celeste, who waved regally from the front row, and then he turned to me. "For years, my daughter Madeline has been away, building her own incredible career in the North." Grant lied. He made my exile sound like a sabbatical. He made my abandonment sound like an ambition. But family always finds its way back to the center. Having her here tonight, standing beside me, proves that no matter how far we expand, the foundation remains solid. We are Caldwells, we are united, and we are ready for the next 30 years. The crowd erupted. They ate it up. They loved the narrative. The prodigal daughter returns. The family is whole. The business is stable. I stood there, frozen. I looked out at the sea of faces clapping for a lie. I realized then exactly what I was. I was not a guest. I was not a daughter. I was a prop. I was a fresh coat of paint on a crumbling building. He was using my physical presence to signal to every creditor in the room that the family was intact, that there was no internal strife, that we were a safe bet. I felt a wave of nausea. followed immediately by a cold, sharp anger. He was selling me. He was trading on my reputation, my sensible appearance, to buy himself more time with the bank. Grant put his arm around my waist and squeezed. To the audience, it looked like a loving father hugging his child. To me, it felt like a shackle. "Smile," he hissed through his teeth, smiling broadly himself. "The guy in the third row is the vice president of First City Bank. Smile at him." I did not smile. I stared straight ahead, my face a mask of neutral, auditor calm. I refused to give him the satisfaction of a performance. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only 5 minutes, the music swelled, and Grant led me off the stage. We walked down the side steps, into the shadows away from the main floor. The moment we were out of the line of sight of the main tables, Grant dropped his arm from my waist as if I were burning him. The benevolent patriarch mask vanished. His face went slack and cold. "That was weak," he snapped, adjusting his tie. "You look like you were at a funeral." "Maybe I am," I said. He stopped walking and turned to face me. We were in a service corridor now, the noise of the party muffled by heavy doors. "Enough games," Grant said. His voice was different now. The charm was gone. This was the voice of a man who was cornered and tired of pretending. "We have a 15-minute window before the main course is served. We are going to the boardroom upstairs. Now." "Why?" I asked, though I already knew. "Because we need to discuss the future of this company," Grant said, "and your role in saving it." "I don't have a role in your company," I said. "You do if you want to walk out of here without seeing your last name dragged through the mud in tomorrow's paper," Celeste said. I hadn't heard her walk up behind us. She was standing there, holding her champagne, her eyes glittering with malice. "Upstairs, now." They turned and walked toward the service elevator. They did not look back to see if I was following. They assumed I would. They assumed that 8 years of silence had made me weak, that I was desperate to belong, that I would do anything to be allowed back into the inner circle. I watched them go. My hand went into the pocket of my navy dress. My fingers brushed the cool metal of my phone. I felt the shape of the side button. I pressed it 3 times. The shortcut activated. The voice recorder app opened and began recording in the background. I took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of industrial cleaner and stale perfume. I was not walking into a family meeting. I was walking into an audit, and I was the only one in the room who knew the books were cooked. I adjusted my grip on the black binder. "Okay," I whispered to myself. "Let's look at the numbers." I followed them into the elevator. The service elevator opened into a corridor that felt miles away from the champagne and jazz of the ballroom below. This was the business end of the hotel, a hallway of beige carpet and silent doors. Grant walked ahead, his pace brisk and agitated. He did not hold the door for me. He pushed into a room labeled Executive Boardroom A and went straight to the head of the table. The room was cold. It smelled of furniture polish and the distinct, dusty scent of unused air conditioning. In the center of the long mahogany table sat a single, thick folder. It was open. Beside it lay a heavy fountain pen, the cap already removed, resting on the blotter like a waiting guillotine. I took the seat opposite my father. Celeste sat to his right, smoothing the fabric of her emerald dress. Logan slumped into a chair against the wall, looking at his watch as if he had a better place to be. "Let's make this simple," Grant said. He tapped the folder with his index finger. "The bank requires a restructuring of our current liquidity positions. It is a standard procedure. We are expanding, and expansion requires capital agility." "Capital agility," I repeated. It was a nonsense phrase. "Is that what we are calling debt these days?" "Watch your tone," Celeste snapped. "Your father is offering you an opportunity." "An opportunity to what?" I reached for the folder. Grant's hand twitched, as if he wanted to snatch it back, but he let me pull the document toward me. It was not a restructuring agreement. It was a guarantor of payment and performance contract. I skipped the preamble. I went straight to the definitions section. My eyes scanned the legal density with the speed of practice. I looked for the keywords that define ruin: joint and several liability, unsecured, non-refundable capital contribution. I stopped at a line near the bottom of the third page. There, written lightly in pencil, so it could be erased or changed later, was a number: $250,000. I looked up. You want me to co-sign a loan for $250,000? It is an investment, Grant corrected immediately. You are buying into the family trust. You become a stakeholder. When the new development in Savannah breaks ground next year, the returns will be significant. We are talking 15% annually. And if the development does not break ground? I asked. If the bank calls the loan? If the contractor sues for unpaid invoices? Grant froze. The muscle in his jaw jumped. He did not know that I knew about the lawsuits. Those are hypothetical scenarios, Grant said, waving his hand dismissively. Business has risks, but we are a family. We absorb risk together. I see, I said. I turned the page. Clause 7. The guarantor acknowledges that this contribution is immediate and irrevocable, meaning, if I sign this, the bank takes the money from my assets to cover your overdrafts, and I have no legal claim to get it back. I am not an investor. Dad, I am a donor. This is a donation to the Save Grant Caldwell's Reputation Fund. Logan laughed from the corner. It was a dry, ugly sound. Come on, Maddie. You have the money. We know you have been saving. What are you going to do with it? Buy a cat condo? Just sign the paper and help us out. I looked at Logan. How do you know what I have? We checked, Celeste said. She didn't even blink. We hired a forensic accountant to look into your assets before we sent the invitation. We needed to know if you were viable. The word hung in the air. Viable. They had not invited a daughter. They had invited a balance sheet. So, I said, my voice steady despite the shaking in my hands which I hid beneath the table. You investigated me. You saw that I have savings. You saw that I have good credit. And you decided to stage a gala to pressure me into signing away my financial future. It is not pressure, Grant said, leaning forward. His face was flushed. It is duty. I raised you. I paid for your braces. I put a roof over your head for 18 years. Now, when the family faces a momentary cash flow bottleneck, you are going to sit there and quote clauses at me? A bottleneck? I pointed to the document. This is a bridge loan maturity. This isn't a bottleneck. Grant, this is a cliff. We just need to get past Monday, Grant shouted. The veneer cracked. He slammed his hand on the table. The bank needs the guarantor on file by Monday morning to extend the line of credit. Once the extension is approved, we get the funding from the new investors, and your name comes off the paper. It is a formality. 48 hours, that is all. There it was, the confirmation, Monday morning. And if the new investors don't show up, I asked, or if they see the drywall lawsuit and run, then my name stays on the paper, and when you default, the bank comes for my apartment. They come for my retirement fund. They garnish my wages. You are so selfish, Celeste hissed. She leaned across the table, her eyes venomous. You always were, cold, unfeeling, just like your mother. I felt a sharp spike of adrenaline, but I did not react. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I held it over the document. What are you doing? Grant demanded. Creating a record, I said. I snapped a high-resolution photo of the page with the pencil-written amount. I turned the page and snapped a photo of the liability clause. Stop that! Celeste stood up. That is confidential family business. It is a legal offer, I said, and I am reviewing it. I put the phone down, screen side up. The recording app was still running, a silent red timer counting the seconds of their desperation. I am not signing this, I said. Not tonight, not ever. Grant looked at me. His eyes were wide, panicked. He looked at the clock on the wall. The gala dinner was starting in 10 minutes. He needed this done. Maddie, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low register. You don't understand the situation. If we don't have this liquidity, everything goes. The house, the business, the cars. We lose everything. Then sell the house, I said. Sell the cars. Downsize. Live within your means. That is what normal people do. We are not normal people, Grant roared. We are Caldwells. I am a Caldwell, I said quietly, and I live in a one-bedroom apartment. I drive a 5-year-old sedan, and I sleep at night because I don't owe anyone a dime. Celeste walked around the table. She stopped right next to my chair. She smelled of expensive perfume and gin. She leaned down, her voice a soft, terrifying whisper. If you walk out of this room without signing, she said, I will make sure everyone in that ballroom knows exactly what kind of daughter you are. I will tell them you abandoned us when we were sick. I will tell them you stole from us before you left for Minneapolis. I will ruin your reputation, Maddie. And in your line of work, reputation is everything, isn't it? Who hires an auditor with a history of family theft? It was a good threat. It was precise. It targeted my livelihood. She knew that an internal auditor needs to be beyond reproach. A rumor like that, even if false, could trigger an ethics investigation at my firm. I looked at her. I looked at the fear behind the malice in her eyes. May I take the contract with me? I asked. If you want me to consider it, I need to have my lawyer review it. That is standard procedure. No, Grant said instantly. He grabbed the folder and pulled it to his chest. No lawyers. This stays in the room. You sign it now, or you don't sign it. So it is a trap, I said. If it were legitimate, you wouldn't be afraid of a lawyer. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but I forced them to hold me. I picked up my black binder. I smoothed the front of my dress. Sit down, Grant commanded. We are not done. We are done, I said. I walked to the door. My hand touched the brass handle. Then, I stopped. I turned back to look at them. They were frozen in a tableau of greed and panic. Grant clutching the folder. Celeste standing with her hands clenched into fists. Logan watching with wide eyes, realizing the money wasn't coming. I had one question. It was the only question that mattered. It was the question that had been burning a hole in my chest for 3,000 days. Before I go, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the cold room, I need to ask you something. In the last 8 years, you called me twice for money. You sent me 0 birthday cards. You didn't tell me when you moved. You didn't tell me when you got married. I looked Grant in the eye. Was there ever a single moment, just one, where you picked up the phone to call me simply because you missed your daughter? Not because you needed a guarantor, not because you needed an audience, but because you wanted to hear my voice? The room went silent. It was not a thoughtful silence. It was a vacuous silence. I watched Grant's eyes shift to the left, searching for a lie. I watched Celeste look away, bored by the sentimentality. I watched Logan shrug, as if the question was in a foreign language. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. No one spoke. No one said, "Of course we missed you." No one lied. They didn't even respect me enough to lie. The truth was so obvious it sucked the oxygen out of the room. I was a resource. You don't miss a resource until it runs out. Thank you, I said. That is exactly what I needed to know. I opened the door. If you walk out that door, Celeste screamed, her voice cracking, don't you dare come back to the party. You are ungrateful. You are dead to us. I have been dead to you for 8 years, I said. I just finally showed up to the funeral. I stepped out into the hallway and let the heavy door click shut behind me. The silence in the corridor was absolute. I leaned against the wall for a moment, breathing in the cool air. I checked my phone. The recording was saved. I had the proof of the coercion. I had the photo of the fraudulent contract, but the night wasn't over. They had threatened to ruin me publicly. Celeste had said she would tell the ballroom I was a thief. I knew her. She wouldn't wait until tomorrow. She would do it now, while she had the audience, to get ahead of the narrative. I could hear the muffled sound of the microphone turning on in the ballroom downstairs. I adjusted my binder. I was not running away. If they wanted to tell a story about me, I was going to make sure the audience had the footnotes. I walked toward the stairs. The doors to the ballroom did not just open. They were thrown wide with a violence that rattled the hinges. Celeste marched into the center of the room, her emerald gown trailing behind her like the tail of a venomous snake. I stood in the shadows of the archway, clutching my binder, and watched as she signaled the band leader. He looked confused for a moment, his baton poised in midair, but the look on Celeste's face was a command that brooked no argument. He cut the music. The jazz died instantly. The sudden silence was jarring, sucking the energy out of the room. 300 conversations faltered and faded as heads turned toward the stage. The clinking of silverware stopped. The laughter died. All eyes were on Celeste, who stood in the center of the dance floor, her chest heaving with a performance of distress that was terrifyingly convincing. She brought a hand to her face, wiping away a tear that I was almost certain she had summoned by sheer force of will. "Ladies and gentlemen," Celeste said, her voice trembling just enough to sound heartbroken without losing projection. "Please, forgive the interruption. I know we are here to celebrate. I know this is supposed to be a night of triumph for my husband, Grant." She paused, looking back toward the hallway where Grant was now emerging, walking slowly, his head bowed, playing the role of the weary, defeated patriarch to perfection. "But it is hard to celebrate," Celeste continued, her voice gaining strength, "when your heart is being broken in real time." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I stepped out of the shadows, just enough to see the room, but not enough to be fully in the spotlight. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. This was the contingency plan. If I did not sign the check, they would cash in my reputation. "We welcomed her back," Celeste cried out, sweeping her arm toward the empty space where I should have been standing. "After 8 years of silence, after 8 years of us praying, calling, reaching out to a daughter who wanted nothing to do with us, we thought tonight was a reunion. We thought she had finally come home." She let out a sob that echoed off the high ceilings. "But we were wrong," she said, her voice turning hard. "Tonight, in the room upstairs, Madeline told us the truth. She didn't come back for family. She came back to laugh at us. She told us she hopes we lose everything. She refused to help her father in his time of need. Not because she can't, but because she enjoys seeing him suffer." The crowd gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the room. I saw faces turning, scanning the edges of the room, looking for the monster Celeste was describing. "She called us a bad investment," Logan shouted from the side of the stage. He had grabbed a wireless microphone, his face twisted into a sneer. "That is what she said. She looked at our dad and called him a bad investment. She has money. She has plenty of it. But she said she would rather burn it than help this family." "It is true," Grant said softly, stepping into the light. He did not yell. He spoke with the quiet, resigned dignity of a martyr. "I tried to be a father. I tried to bridge the gap. But some wounds just don't heal when the other person holds the knife." The narrative was taking hold. I could feel it cementing in the air. The guests were shifting in their seats, their expressions hardening. These were wealthy people. They understood family legacy. They understood the concept of the ungrateful child. It was a trope they feared in their own lives, and seeing it played out in front of them triggered a primal, defensive anger. I heard a woman at the table nearest to me whisper to her husband, "After everything Grant has done for this city, that girl must be sociopathic." "Spoiled," the man muttered back, shaking his head. "Probably spent her 20s partying on his dime and now wants to cut him off." "Disgusting," another voice hissed. I stood there, my hand gripping the cold leather of my binder so hard my knuckles turned white. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, but my mind was remarkably, glacially clear. I was watching a demolition. They were not just hurting my feelings, they were dismantling my character. Then I saw him. Standing near the dessert station, scribbling furiously into a notepad, was a man in a rumpled suit. I recognized him from the local business journal. He was a blogger known for his biting editorials on Savannah's elite. He had his phone out, recording. That was the tipping point. If I walked out the door right now, as every instinct in my body was screaming at me to do, this story, would be in the morning edition. Real estate tycoon's daughter abandons family at gala. It would follow me to Minneapolis. A quick Google search by my employer or a client would bring up this moment. In my line of work, integrity is the only currency that matters. If I was painted as a deceptive, cruel, financial liability, my career as an auditor was over. They thought I would run. They banked on it. They remembered the 25-year-old girl who cried when she was left in a dorm room. They thought shame would make me vanish. But they had forgotten one thing. I was not that girl anymore. I was an auditor, and an auditor does not run from a discrepancy. An auditor investigates it. I took a deep breath. I smoothed the front of my navy dress. I adjusted my glasses. And I started walking. I did not walk toward the exit. I walked toward the stage. The sound of my heels on the parquet floor was sharp and rhythmic. Click, click, click. The crowd parted as I approached. People recoiled from me physically, pulling their chairs in, casting looks of pure venom my way. I felt their judgment like radiant heat, but I did not look down. I kept my eyes fixed on the stage, on the 3 people who had tried to sell me for a bank loan. Celeste saw me coming. Her eyes widened. She had expected me to be halfway to the parking lot by now. She faltered in her fake sobbing. Grant looked up, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. For a fleeting second, I saw hope in his eyes. He thought I was coming to surrender. He thought the public pressure had worked, and I was coming to the microphone to apologize and sign the paper. I walked up the stairs to the stage. The spotlight hit me, blinding and hot. It felt like an interrogation lamp. Celeste stepped back, clutching her chest. "Madeline," she said, her voice breathless, playing the scene to the end. "Have you come to apologize?" I did not answer her. I walked past her. I walked past Logan, who looked suddenly unsure of himself. I walked straight to the podium where my father stood. Grant looked at me. "Maddie," he whispered, away from the mic. "Just say you are sorry. We can fix this. Just sign it." I looked at him. I looked at the man whose blood ran in my veins. The man who had traded my childhood for a country club membership. I felt a profound sense of loss. But it was not the loss of a father. It was the loss of the illusion that I ever had one. I reached out and took the microphone from the stand. The feedback whined for a split second, a high-pitched screech that made everyone wince. Then, silence. Absolute, heavy silence. 300 people held their breath, waiting for the breakdown, waiting for the tears, waiting for the ungrateful daughter to beg for forgiveness. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw the judgment. I saw the curiosity. I saw the reporter with his pen poised over the paper. I did not smile. I did not cry. I placed my black binder on the podium with a solid, heavy thud. The sound was amplified by the microphone, echoing through the ballroom like a gavel strike. "I will not take much of your time," I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice I used in boardrooms when I had to tell a CEO that his CFO was stealing. It was calm, low, and terrifyingly reasonable. "I know you are all waiting for the main course, but my family has asked for 5 minutes to tell a story about truth and reconciliation." I paused. I looked directly at the reporter. "However," I continued, "stories can be subjective, memory can be faulty, emotions can blur the lines of reality." I opened the binder. I took out my phone and held up the USB cable I had brought with me. I plugged it into the podium's media console, which controlled the massive projection screen behind me, the screen that had been displaying a slideshow of Grant's building projects all night. The screen flickered. The image of a skyscraper vanished, replaced by the stark, white glow of my laptop desktop. Grant realized what was happening a second too late. He lunged forward. "Maddie, don't!" I sidestepped him, keeping the microphone close to my lips. "My father and stepmother have told you a very moving story tonight," I said, my voice cutting through Grant's protest. "They told you about love. They told you about abandonment. But I am an auditor. I don't work in stories. I work in receipts." I looked at the crowd. The hostility was shifting to confusion. They were not expecting a presentation. They were expecting a drama. "If you prefer data over anecdotes," I said, hitting the spacebar on my laptop to open the first file. "Tonight I have plenty." The screen behind me lit up. It was not a photo, it was a spreadsheet. And in the far right column, highlighted in red, were numbers that were about to tear the roof off the Whitaker Hotel. The massive screen behind me, which moments ago had been displaying a soft focus montage of my father shaking hands with mayors and cutting ribbons, was now a stark, blinding white. The Excel spreadsheet projected there was 40 feet wide. The font was black, crisp, and unforgiving. I adjusted the microphone. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the projector fan. "This," I said, my voice magnified to fill every corner of the ballroom, "is a ledger of my interactions with the Caldwell family over the last 8 years. I know you were just told a story about a daughter who abandoned her parents, but numbers do not have a narrative arc. Numbers do not lie to save face." I pressed the arrow key on my laptop. The first set of data highlighted in yellow. "Exhibit A," I said. "August 14th, 2 years ago, a wire transfer from my personal savings account, $5,000. A murmur rippled through the front tables. "The recipient," I continued, pointing to the column, "was Logan Caldwell. The purpose stated in his text message to me was emergency startup capital for a coffee importation business. I sent it because I believed in him." I hit the key again. A new image appeared next to the spreadsheet. It was a screenshot of a text message from Logan, dated 3 months later. "Whole thing is a wash. Business is hard." "Zero repayment," I said. "Zero business launched, 100% loss." Logan, standing to my left, looked like he had been slapped. He opened his mouth to object, but I was already moving on. "Exhibit B," I said. "February of this year, a transfer of $12,000 to Celeste Caldwell." I heard a gasp from a woman near the front. $12,000 was a lot of money to the people in this room, but it was not the amount that mattered. It was the context. "The request was for emergency repairs to the floor of the family estate," I explained, keeping my tone clinical, like I was presenting a quarterly earnings report. "I was told the house was unlivable. I was told my father was too stressed to handle it. I sent the money because I was told it was for safety." I clicked the next slide. The photo of Celeste and Grant in Cabo San Lucas appeared. They were tanned, holding tequila shots, smiling against a backdrop of pristine ocean. The date stamp was magnified in the corner. "This photo was taken 5 days after I sent the money," I said. "There was no contractor hired. There was no invoice. There was only a 5-star resort invoice that matches the transfer amount almost to the penny." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The sympathy that Celeste had manufactured only minutes ago evaporated. I saw the faces of the guests hardening. These were business people. They understood misappropriation of funds. They understood fraud. "But money is just paper," I said, looking out at the crowd. "You can lose money and still love your family. The real currency of a relationship is effort. So let us look at the audit of effort." I switched tabs. The screen filled with a long, dense list of phone logs. "These are my outgoing calls to Grant, Celeste, and Logan Caldwell from 2017 to 2023, I said. 142 calls. Duration of conversation? 0 minutes. Every single one went to voicemail." I clicked again. Scanned images of FedEx delivery receipts appeared, tiled across the screen like a mosaic of rejection. "These are the tracking receipts for Christmas gifts, birthday gifts, and anniversary presents sent to the address listed on this invitation," I said. "You can see the signatures, signed by Grant, signed by Celeste, accepted, kept, never acknowledged." I paused. I looked at Celeste. She was gripping the edge of a table, her knuckles white, her face a mask of fury and terror. She knew she could not scream now. Screaming would only prove she had lost control. "In 8 years," I said, "I received exactly 2 text messages from this family." I put my hand in my pocket and pulled out my phone. I held it up, though the text was already projected on the screen behind me in 10-foot-tall letters. "Message 1, from Logan, need $5,000 for a deal, urgent." Message 2, From Celeste. House is falling apart. Send 12,000 or don't bother coming home. I lowered the phone. That is it. That is the entire correspondence. No happy birthday, no Merry Christmas, no are you safe? Just pay us. The silence in the room was heavy now. It was the silence of a jury that has seen the murder weapon. The moral high ground my father had tried to stand on was crumbling beneath his feet, eroded by the undeniable weight of timestamps and bank routing numbers. But you might be wondering, I said, shifting my weight. Why now? Why, after 8 years of treating me like an ATM, they lost the PIN code to, did they invite me here tonight? Why the gala? Why the reunion? Grant stepped forward. Madeline, that is enough, he warned, his voice low and dangerous. You have made your point. Turn it off. I am not done, I said. I am just getting to the bottom line. I hit the key again. The personal grievances vanished. The screen was now filled with public records, court dockets, liens. This is the current financial standing of Caldwell Development Partners, I announced. A shockwave went through the room. This was taboo. You did not talk about a man's debt at his own party, but I was not a guest. I was an auditor, and the books were open. Lawsuit filed by Southern Drywall and Acoustics for $42,000 in unpaid labor. I read. Mechanics lien filed by Greenscape Solutions. Active litigation for breach of contract with the window suppliers. I saw men in suits pulling out their phones, likely texting their finance departments to stop checks or freeze deals. And finally, I said, bringing up the document Evan had found, the one that was the ticking clock of this entire charade. The bridge loan from First City Bank, principal amount, $250,000. Maturity date, this coming Monday. I turned to look at my father. He looked smaller now. The spotlight seemed to be crushing him. They did not invite me here to apologize, I told the crowd. They invited me here because on Monday morning, the bank forecloses on the family estate if they do not secure a guarantor for a refinancing extension. I clicked to the final slide. It was the photo I had taken in the boardroom just 20 minutes ago, the document with the pencil-written amount, the clause highlighted in yellow. This is the paper they tried to force me to sign upstairs, I said. Clause 7, non-refundable capital contribution. I looked at the wealthy investors in the front row. You all know what that means, I said. It means if the business fails, I don't get my money back. I am not an investor. I am collateral damage. They wanted to use my credit score to plug a hole in a sinking ship just long enough for them to get on the lifeboats. I closed my laptop. The screen went black, but the image was burned into everyone's retinas. They don't remember me out of love, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. They remember me because of a deadline. Grant lunged. He lost his composure entirely. He scrambled up the few steps to the podium, his face purple with rage. He reached for the microphone, his hand shaking. She is lying, Grant shouted, his voice cracking without the amplification of the mic I pulled away from him. She is mentally unstable. She forged those documents. Security, get her off the stage. But no security guard moved. They were looking at the screen. They were looking at the man who hadn't paid his drywallers. I stepped back, keeping the microphone out of his reach. I was not done. I had one final nail to drive into the coffin of his deception. I scanned the room. I found him. Sitting at table 4, looking pale and sick, was Marcus Henderson. He was the CEO of a major venture capital firm in Atlanta. I knew from my research that he was the big fish Grant was hoping to hook tonight. Miss Henderson, I said clearly. The man looked up, startled to be addressed. I believe you are currently in due diligence to invest $2 million into Caldwell Development's new luxury condos, I said. The room turned to look at him. Henderson didn't speak, but his hesitation was answer enough. I have a question for you. Sir, I said, if a CEO is willing to defraud his own daughter for $250,000 just to keep the lights on for another month, what do you think he is going to do with your $2 million? Grant froze. He looked at Henderson. Henderson looked at Grant, and then, very slowly, He reached for his napkin. He placed it on the table. He stood up. "I think," Mr. Henderson said, his voice carrying in the silent room, "that my team needs to reevaluate our position." He turned and walked toward the exit. It was the first domino. "No," Grant whispered. "Marcus, wait. It is a misunderstanding. She is sick. Marcus." But Marcus Henderson did not stop. And following him, a man from the bank stood up, then a woman from the city council. The sound of chairs scraping against the floor began to fill the room, a cacophony of rejection. I looked at Grant. He was standing center stage, but the audience was leaving. The play was over. The curtain had been ripped down, and there was nothing left but the ugly, unvarnished machinery of his greed. I placed the microphone back on the stand. I picked up my black binder. I unplugged my laptop. "I suggest you call the bank, Dad," I said to him, loud enough for Celeste and Logan to hear. "I don't think Monday is going to go the way you planned." I turned and walked down the stairs. The crowd parted for me again, but this time it was not out of disgust. It was out of fear. It was out of respect. I walked through the aisle of empty chairs, head high, listening to the sound of my family's empire crumbling one guest at a time. The departure of Marcus Henderson was not an isolated event. It was a signal flare. In the world of high-stakes business, panic is a contagion, and Marcus was patient zero. When a man who manages billions of dollars in assets decides that a room is unsafe, everyone else follows. I stood at the bottom of the stage stairs and watched the domino effect. It was quiet, almost polite, which made it all the more devastating. There was no screaming, no running, just the collective rustle of silk and wool as the city's elite decided that being seen at the Caldwell Gala was a liability they could not afford. A banker from Wells Fargo checked his phone and signaled his wife. The mayor's chief of staff suddenly remembered an urgent appointment. They were filing out, heads down, avoiding eye contact with Grant, who was now gripping the podium as if it were the only thing keeping him upright on a tilting deck. "Please," Grant called out, his voice straining against the dying acoustic of the room. "Everyone, stay. It is a misunderstanding. My daughter, she is confused. She is emotional. She does not understand the complexities of commercial real estate financing." He pointed a shaking finger at me. "She is acting out of hurt. This is a tantrum, not a financial report." I stopped walking. I turned slowly to face him. The room was half empty now, but the people who remained, the die-hard gossip mongers and the few relatives too stunned to move, were listening intently. "Confused?" I repeated the word, letting it hang in the cool air. "Grant, I am a certified internal auditor with a specialization in forensic accounting. I don't get confused by balance sheets. I get confused by why you thought you could hide a shell company within a construction budget." Grant went pale. It was a specific shade of gray that I had only seen once before, on a client who realized I had found his offshore accounts. "I don't know what you are talking about," he stammered. "I think you do," I said. I raised my voice slightly, addressing the remaining crowd. "You see, when I found the lawsuit from Southern Drywall, I didn't just read the complaint. I accessed the discovery documents filed with the county clerk. Public record is a beautiful thing. It turns out, the lawyers for the drywall company requested a full accounting of project expenses. I tapped my black binder. Do you want to know why the drywallers weren't paid? Because on March 4th, a transfer of $50,000 was made from the project operating account to an entity called Emerald Consulting LLC. Celeste, who had been standing frozen near the stairs, suddenly lunged toward me. Her face was twisted into a mask of feral panic. "Shut up! You shut your mouth!" She reached for the phone in my hand, her fingernails clawing at the air. It was a desperate, physical attempt to delete the evidence, as if smashing the device would erase the truth from the universe. But I had anticipated this. I stepped back smoothly, and Evan, who I had not realized was standing near the tech booth, stepped forward, raising his own phone. "I wouldn't do that, Mrs. Caldwell," I said calmly. "Every document I just showed, and the ones I am about to mention, are already uploaded to a cloud server shared with 3 different legal firms. Destroying my phone only adds an assault charge to your list of problems." Celeste froze. She looked at the guests who were still watching. She straightened her dress, trying to regain some shred of dignity, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold them at her sides. "You are lying," she hissed. "Emerald Consulting is a legitimate vendor." "Emerald Consulting is registered to a residential address in Savannah," I countered. "Specifically, a condominium owned by your sister, and according to the credit card statements attached to the discovery file, Emerald Consulting spent $50,000 not on construction advice, but on a luxury cruise to the Mediterranean and a very specific purchase at a Cartier boutique in Paris." I looked at her wrist. "Is that the panther bracelet? Celeste? It catches the light beautifully. It must be heavy to wear," knowing it cost a man his drywall business. A gasp went through the room. It was one thing to be in debt. It was another to steal from your own company to buy jewelry while your contractors went unpaid. Grant was coming down the stairs now. He looked dangerous. The suave businessman was gone, replaced by a cornered animal. "You hacked us," he accused. "You stole private information. I will have you arrested for corporate espionage." "I didn't have to hack anything," I said. "And that brings me to the second twist of the evening, the one you really didn't see coming." I opened the binder to the very last tab. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a printout of an email. "Technology is tricky," I said to the room, "especially the autocomplete function in Outlook. Last week, Celeste, you sent an email to your family attorney, drafting the plan for tonight. You wanted to discuss how to pressure me into signing the guarantor contract." I held the paper up. "But you made a mistake. You typed MAD into the recipient line. You meant to copy your crisis management PR firm, Madison Avenue Reps. Instead, you hit Madeline Caldwell, old email, the one I haven't used in years but never deactivated." Celeste's eyes went wide. She stopped breathing. "I read it on the plane ride here," I said. "Would you like to hear your own strategy?" I began to read, my voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. Subject: the Saturday strategy. Priority: high. Body: we need to get her on stage immediately. Do not let her sit down. If we put her under the lights in front of the mayor and the investors, she will crumble. She has always been weak in public. Make sure Grant emphasizes the prodigal daughter angle. Guilt is the lever. If she cries, we hand her the pen. She will sign just to make it stop." I lowered the paper. I looked at my father. "Weak," I repeated. "That is what you banked on. You thought I was weak. You thought that because I wanted a family, I would buy one at any price." "We didn't mean it like that," Logan blurted out. He was sweating profusely, his bow tie undone. We knew you could afford it. We knew you had the money." "How?" I whipped around to face him. "How did you know I could afford it, Logan? I never told you my salary." Logan realized his mistake instantly, but the words were already tumbling out of his mouth, propelled by the pressure of the moment. "Because we checked. We paid a guy to pull your bank records. We saw the $88,000 in your savings account. You are sitting on cash while we are drowning. It is selfish." The admission hung in the air. "We paid a guy to pull your bank records." "So," I said, "you not only committed fraud against your contractors, but you also engaged in illegal surveillance of a family member's finances." I looked over at the table where my great-uncle Robert was sitting. Uncle Robert was 80 years old. He was the patriarch of the extended family, a man who had built the original Caldwell reputation on handshake deals and honest work. He was sitting with his cane between his knees, staring at Grant with an expression of profound sorrow. Slowly, painfully, Uncle Robert stood up. "Robert, please," Grant pleaded. "Don't go. Let me explain." Uncle Robert did not look at Grant. He looked at me. He took off his hat. "Madeline," he said, his voice raspy but clear. "I did not know. I truly did not know. I am ashamed to be sitting at this table." He bowed his head to me. It was a gesture of respect I had never received in my entire life. "I am sorry. Uncle Robert said, and then he turned his back on his nephew and walked toward the door. That was the breaking point. The apology from the elder stripped away the last layer of Grant's victimhood. He could not claim he was doing this for the family legacy, when the legacy just walked out the door in disgust. Grant lost it. The veins in his neck bulged. He ripped his bow tie off and threw it on the floor. He stepped toward me, ignoring the few remaining guests, ignoring the ruin of his reputation. He reverted to the only dynamic he knew: ownership. "You think you are special?" Grant screamed. The sound was raw and ugly. "You think you are better than us? You are nothing. You are a cold, heartless little clerk. You owe this family. I gave you life. You owe me that signature. You owe me that money." The words echoed off the gilded walls. "You owe me." It was the truth. Finally, no more flowery speeches about love, no more reunion banners, just the raw, naked entitlement of a narcissist who believed his children were property. I stood my ground. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I watched him scream until he ran out of breath, panting, red-faced, standing in the wreckage of his own ego. I looked at him with the detachment of an auditor closing a file on a bankrupt entity. I felt absolutely nothing. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. There was only the cool, gray clarity of a finalized transaction. "I don't owe you a thing," I said quietly. I looked at Celeste, who was sobbing for real now, terrified of the future. I looked at Logan, who was staring at his shoes. "The audit is complete," I said. "The account is closed." I turned around. I did not run. I walked. I walked past the empty tables with their half-eaten dinners. I walked past the abandoned champagne flutes. I walked toward the heavy double doors at the back of the room. "Maddie!" Grant screamed behind me, a desperate, broken sound. "Maddie, come back. You can't leave us like this." I didn't stop. I didn't turn. I pushed the doors open and stepped out into the lobby. The air was cooler there. It smelled of rain and freedom. "It is done," I whispered to myself. I kept walking, listening to the silence I left behind. I walked out of the Whitaker Hotel and the humidity of the Georgia night hit me like a physical wall. But for the first time in my life, I did not find it suffocating. I found it cleansing. The air smelled of rain and pavement, a stark contrast to the recycled air and stale perfume of the ballroom I had just dismantled. I did not look back at the hotel. I did not check my phone to see if Grant was calling. I walked 2 blocks to a quiet corner near a park, leaned against a brick wall, and dialed the only number that mattered. Evan answered on the first ring. "Tell me you are safe," he said. "I am safe," I replied. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. It was lower, steadier. It was the voice of someone who had just put down a heavy load after carrying it for a decade. "Did you do it?" Evan asked. "I did," I said. "It was exactly as we thought. Actually, it was worse. They admitted to the surveillance. They admitted to the fraud. It is all on record." "And the crowd?" "Gone," I said. "The investors walked out. The bank rep walked out. The reputation of Caldwell Development is currently evaporating." "Good," Evan said. "Now, get to the airport. Do not go back to your hotel room. I already checked you out remotely. Go home. Maddie." "Maddie is not coming home," I said softly. "Maddie stayed in that ballroom." I hung up the phone. I took a cab to the airport and waited 5 hours for the first flight back to Minneapolis. While I sat at the gate, I saw people scrolling on their phones. I saw a woman 2 seats over watching a video. I heard my own voice, tinny and small, coming from her speaker. They don't remember me out of love. They remember me because of a deadline. I knew the internet was doing what the internet does. The guests had recorded the audit. By morning, the downfall of Grant Caldwell would be a viral sensation on TikTok and Twitter. People would dissect it. They would make memes. They would call me a hero or a villain, but I would not be there to read the comments. I was not looking for validation from strangers. I was looking for erasure. When I landed in Minneapolis, I did not go to work. I went straight to the office of a lawyer named Harrison, a man who specialized in privacy law and identity protection. I had made the appointment a week ago, just in case. Harrison was a man of few words and many forms. He sat behind a desk piled high with files and looked at me over his spectacles. "You are sure about this?" he asked. "Changing a name is a significant administrative burden. It impacts your credit history, your social security, your deeds, your degrees, everything." "I don't want to just change my name," I said. "I want to sever the lineage. I want it so that if someone searches for Madeline Caldwell, the trail ends at a brick wall." "We can file for a legal name change under a sealed petition if you can prove safety concerns," Harrison said. "Given the public nature of the confrontation you just described, and the potential for harassment, we have grounds." I spent the next 3 days filling out paperwork until my hand cramped. I requested a new Social Security card. I contacted the credit bureaus to freeze the files associated with my old identity and open new files under the pending new one. I went to the bank and closed my accounts, asking for the balances to be issued in cashier's checks. I did not act out of fear. I acted out of precision. I treated my own life like a sensitive data migration project. Then came the apartment. I called a real estate agent I knew and told her I wanted a cash buyer. Quick close. I listed the unit for 10% below market value to ensure speed. I did not want to negotiate. I wanted to be gone. The market was hot, and the apartment was sold in 48 hours to a young couple who loved the view of the river. Packing was the hardest part. Not because I was sentimental about the furniture. I sold most of it or donated it, but because packing forces you to touch every single object you own and ask if it belongs in your future. I threw away the photos. I threw away the old birthday cards from college friends I no longer spoke to. I shredded every document that had the name Caldwell on it. On the last night, sitting on the floor of my empty living room amidst a sea of cardboard boxes, I tackled the closet. High up on the shelf, pushed to the back, was a small, dusty cedar box. It was my mother's keepsake box. I had not opened it since the day she died. I had lugged it from dorm room to apartment, a heavy wooden anchor I was afraid to examine. I pulled it down. Inside, there were the usual things: a lock of my baby hair, a silver rattle, photos of her and my father from before he became a monster, back when his smile reached his eyes. But at the bottom, beneath a stack of old recipes, I found a folded piece of lined notebook paper. The ink was faded, blue ballpoint on yellowing paper. It was dated 2 weeks before she passed away. I unfolded it, my hands trembling for the first time since the gala. "My sweet Maddie, I am writing this because I know I won't be there to protect you. Your father. He is a builder. He builds things up, but he uses people as bricks. He used me until I was tired. I am so afraid he will use you too. You have a good heart. You are loyal, but loyalty to the wrong person is just a cage. If the day comes when you feel like you are disappearing in this house, if you feel like you are being consumed to feed his ego, please listen to me. If you need to run, run. Do not look back. Do not feel guilty. A parent's job is to give you roots and wings. If I can only give you one, let it be wings. I love you. Be free, Mom." I sat on the floor of the empty apartment and let the tears come. They were not tears of grief. They were tears of permission. For 8 years, I had carried a subconscious guilt that leaving the family was a betrayal of my mother's memory. I thought I had to stay and try to fix what was broken because that is what she would have done. But she had known. She had seen the writing on the wall before I even knew how to read the language of manipulation. She had left me an exit strategy from beyond the grave. I wiped my face, I folded the note and put it in my wallet, the only piece of the past I would carry into the future. The next morning, the court order came through. I stood in front of the mirror in the hotel room where I was staying for my final night in Minneapolis. I looked at the woman in the glass. She looked the same, but the legal entity she represented had shifted. "My name is Rowan Pierce," I said aloud. Rowan, a tree that thrives in difficult climates, known for protection and resilience. Pierce, sharp, direct, able to cut through the noise. It was a name that had no echoes. It sounded like a woman who came from nowhere and answered to no one. I met Evan for coffee at a place near the airport. It was our final meeting. I handed him a single piece of paper with my new contact information. "This is it," I said. "Memorize it, then burn it." Evan looked at the name. He smiled, a sad but proud smile. "Rowan, I like it. It suits you." "Here are the rules," I said, leaning over the table. "If they call you, and they will, you know nothing. You haven't seen me. I quit. I moved to Europe. I joined a monastery. Pick a lie and stick to it." "I will tell them you went to audit the devil," Evan said. "It feels appropriate." "Seriously, Evan, no updates on them. I don't want to know if Grant goes to jail. I don't want to know if they lose the house. If you tell me, you drag me back. The only time you call me is if you want to talk about movies, or wine, or your dog. The Caldwell file is permanently sealed." "Understood," Evan said. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Have a good life, Rowan Pierce." I left him there. I took an Uber to the airport. I walked through security with my temporary paper ID and my passport, which would be updated at the embassy later. I did not buy a ticket to Europe. I bought a ticket to Seattle. I had done my research. Seattle was a city of rain and tech and gray skies, a place where people respected privacy. I had already secured a job interview, conducting it virtually under my new identity. The company was called North Bay Ledger Group. It was a boutique firm, quiet, respectable, and completely disconnected from the flashy world of real estate development. I sat in the window seat as the plane taxied down the runway. The engines roared to life, that deep, vibrating hum that signals the transition from earth to sky. I watched Minneapolis disappear beneath the clouds. I watched the city where I had been lonely, the city where I had been a victim, fade into a patchwork of gray and white. I thought about the gala. I thought about the spreadsheet on the big screen. I thought about Grant's screaming face. It all felt like a movie I had watched a long time ago. It didn't feel like my life anymore. The flight attendant came by. "Can I get you anything to drink, Ms. Pierce?" I looked up. It was the first time anyone had addressed me by that name. It didn't feel strange. It felt like a key turning in a lock. "Water, please," I said. "No ice." I leaned back against the seat. I closed my eyes. I was 33 years old. I had $88,000 in a cashier's check in my bag. I had a new name. I had a letter from my mother telling me to run. And for the first time in 8 years, I wasn't waiting for a phone call. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I wasn't waiting for permission to exist. I was simply flying. They did not let me go quietly. I never expected them to. When a parasite loses its host, it does not simply accept starvation. It thrashes. It hunts. It tries to reattach itself by any means necessary. In the week following the gala, the silence I had imposed was bombarded from the outside. My old phone number, which I had not yet deactivated, became a graveyard of desperate voicemails. I listened to none of them, but I saw the logs. They called my old office in Minneapolis. They were told by a polite HR representative that Madeline Caldwell no longer worked there. They called the apartment building, only to be told by the concierge that the unit had been sold, and the previous tenant had left no forwarding address. It was a systematic shutdown. I had anticipated their panic, and I had built walls high enough to withstand it. Grant, true to his nature, tried to solve the problem with money he did not have. I learned later. Through the final automated alert I had set up on his name before scrubbing my accounts, that he had hired a private investigator. It was a pathetic move. A man who could not pay his drywall contractors was paying a stranger to hunt down his daughter, but the investigator hit the same dead ends that I had meticulously constructed. He found the court filing for a name change, because that is public record. But he found no address. He found no employer. He found a ghost. The only thing that managed to slip through the cracks was an email from Celeste. It arrived in my old inbox 2 hours before I permanently deleted the account. I almost did not open it. I hovered the mouse over the trash icon, tempted to let it disappear into the digital void, but the auditor in me needed to see the final piece of evidence. I needed to confirm that I was making the right choice. The subject line read, "A Path Forward." It was not an apology, it was a proposal. Maddie, the email began, "We are willing to forgive the stunt you pulled at the gala. It has caused us significant embarrassment and financial damage, but we are family, and families forgive. Your father is willing to restructure the trust so that you have a silent partnership role, provided you sign the guarantor documents by Friday. We can frame your outburst as a mental health episode caused by work stress. We can fix your reputation. Come home. We need to stick together." I read it twice. There was no "I am sorry." There was no "We love you." There was no acknowledgement that they had tried to defraud me. There was only a negotiation. They were offering to forgive me for exposing their crimes, in exchange for my financial suicide. They wanted to gaslight the public into thinking I was crazy so they could save face. It was the closure I didn't know I needed. It was the proof that they were incapable of change. They were not heartbroken parents. They were failed business partners looking for a bailout. I did not reply to the email. I opened a new document. I typed a single, physical letter. I did not use letterhead. I did not put a return address. Grant and Celeste. There is no path forward. There is no negotiation. The person you are looking for does not exist anymore. Do not hire investigators. Do not contact my friends. Do not look for me. From this day forward, I am no longer your daughter. I am a stranger who knows your secrets. If you attempt to find me again, I will release the rest of the audit to the IRS. Goodbye. I did not sign it Maddie. I did not sign it Madeline. I took a black pen and signed 2 initials, R.P. It was the first time I had used my new initials. It felt like locking a door. I mailed the letter from a post office box at the airport, ensuring the postmark would give them no clue as to my actual location. The final step was the legal one. The morning of my court hearing in Minneapolis was gray and rainy, the kind of weather that washes things clean. I stood in the courtroom, wearing a simple black suit. The judge was an older woman with kind eyes. She looked at my petition. She looked at the evidence of harassment I had attached as justification for the sealed record. "Are you doing this of your own free will?" she asked. "Do you understand that this permanently alters your legal identity?" "I understand," I said. My voice did not shake. "It is the only way I can be safe." The gavel came down with a sharp clack. It was a sound of finality. It was the sound of a chain breaking. "Petition granted," she said. "Good luck, Ms. Pierce." I walked out of the courthouse and into the rain. I stopped at a trash can near the entrance. I took my old phone out of my pocket. It contained the voicemails from Grant. It contained the texts from Logan. It contained the history of a woman who had spent 8 years begging for crumbs of affection. I did not just throw it away. I popped the back open. I took out the SIM card. I took a pair of scissors from my bag and cut the chip into 4 pieces. I dropped the pieces into the bin, followed by the phone itself. I felt a phantom vibration in my hand, the ghost of a notification, and then it was gone. I took a cab to the airport. I carried 1 suitcase and a laptop bag. I did not ask the driver to drive past my old apartment. I did not ask him to drive past the park where I used to eat lunch alone. I looked straight ahead at the highway. Nostalgia is a trap. It is a way of romanticizing a past that was actually painful. I was not leaving behind happy memories. I was leaving behind a crime scene. At the terminal, I printed my boarding pass. The name on the paper was Rowan Pierce. I looked at it for a long time. It wasn't just a name. It was a shield. It was a boundary that could not be crossed. I went through security. I sat at the gate. I watched the planes taking off, giant metal birds defying gravity. I thought about the little girl who used to wait by the window for her father to come home. I felt a wave of pity for her, but I did not feel like her anymore. I was the woman who had saved her. When they called my group, I walked down the jet bridge. I found my seat, 22A, by the window. I buckled the seatbelt. The click was satisfying. The plane taxied to the runway. The engines roared to life, a deep, building power that vibrated through the floor. As we accelerated, I felt the G-force pushing me back into the seat, pressing the past out of my lungs. We lifted off. I watched Minneapolis shrink below me. The roads became lines. The buildings became blocks. The problems that had seemed so massive. The father who had seemed so terrifying. The stepmother who had seemed so cruel. They all became microscopic. They were just dust motes in a vast world. I took a deep breath. My chest expanded. For the first time in 8 years, there was no tightness. There was no waiting for the other shoe to drop. There was no deadline. They had wanted my signature. They had wanted my money. They had wanted my silence. In the end, I gave them none of it. I gave them exactly what they had given me. They forgot me for 8 years, so I decided to return the favor. I forgot them. I forgot them by law. I forgot them by boundary, and most importantly, I forgot them by doing the one thing they never thought I was strong enough to do. I never came back. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from today. So please drop a comment below and let's share our thoughts on Maddie's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people who might need to hear it. See you in the next video.